Okay. So, um, this formally completes the work that we've done together in terms of your personal system and really being set up to notice both the psychological internal components to performance and to getting things done, as well as the external systems that you need to manage the freaking chaos that's coming at you. Right? The world is only ever going to get more hyper intense. Protect your mind. Bring it out. Everybody else on the same page. Then take a while. Just make sure you protect your peace of mind, use your system, reach out to us if you need any support, use the online course, etc., etc. But now we're going to switch tracks to thinking about this all from a different perspective, which is looking at this more from the environmental systemic perspective. Very difficult to do this work and not actually acknowledge the systemic issue that we have in our society around this constant pressure to push and get things done. In the book that I wrote for groundwork and that Olivia helped me write, we call it the impossible task. We are being asked to do more than is actually doable, and it is literally impossible to keep up in this society. So we want to bring you some relief in this conversation by really exploring, what does that mean about the environments that you're all active in? How can we do something about it? And hopefully resurface some hope about it. But really, mostly this is about acknowledging and really wanting to make sure that you know this is not about you. This is not your fault. The overwhelm and the stress that you experience is not your fault. Yeah? Okay, over to Jen. Jen is also, by the way, one of the most intelligent people I know. You really are. So I'm very excited to doing this with you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm so excited to be with you, and I want to just start by acknowledging that I had a life experience that looked very much like Everett's last year, and you're about the third professional group that I've been in since I've sort of come back to work. And so, this is, if I'm stumbly, if things are not fitting together quite right, that's what's going on. And I really believe in dialogue and just being like fully human. So if you're not following me at any point, then please let me know. My brain goes super wide and sometimes I need help like coming back. And so I invite that just as like a invitation to start our conversation. And I also want to just kind of do like a temperature check with you because you've had a fire hose directed at you for a few days. And there's sort of two ways to do this session. And so the first way is just more dialogic. I'll open with some thoughts and prompts, and then we just all discuss together based on that. And then the second way is that I give you those same thoughts, and we pause for a listening meditation where I'm going to read you an essay written by a neurodivergent woman about how she got pushed out of a public system just based on these dynamics we're talking about. This problem where organizations have nervous systems that are set to urgency, and so no matter how hard you try as an individual, that cultural immune system is just going to spit you out and spit you out and spit you out. So we can get brought into that world for a minute, which might be a little activating. Also, you might just know it so well, you're like, I don't need to hear that essay. And it's also going to depend where you're at with your capacity. And so just like quickly, hand up if you prefer the more dialogic open option one. That's a pretty good majority. Yeah. Okay. So we can send that essay. It's on Substack. You're going to get a link to my Substack, and I can also redirect you to that essay if you want to read it. So briefly to position myself. So my main kind of work in the world, and honestly, I'm still learning how to language it, but I think the closest that I can land on is I do transformation strategy. And partially why I'm drawn to transformation is because I've been through a lot. And what we know from system science is that there's this principle called scale invariance. What happens to the individual, you can see that pattern of the collective and vice versa. And my brain just does that. It just sees patterns and can't help it. Even if I didn't want it to, it's always pattern seeking. And so a couple of observations I've made about transformation at those two scales is, firstly, you have to go through a breakdown. It's inevitable. Transformation means before and after. So change is more of the same. It's incrementalism. It's like you can have a disruption So let's say like the 2008 financial crisis, right? A lot of us with a certain set of values, like, oh my God, finally, we might get a different economic system. We might actually finally have change. Same as when Obama got elected. A lot of us were like, oh my gosh, change, it's gonna happen. We're gonna get a better society. That did not happen, right? We just kept on the same path. That's because we're not so far interested in transformation. Transformation is very hard. You need, number one, the system to disrupt. And so that's why our lives feel the way that we do, is because we're living through a historical transformation. And I can, I'm gonna be careful not to dive too deep. I read a lot about this. Also, some of you might be familiar with, say, like Joanna Macy or these other folks who talk about the great turning, where we're living through something so much bigger. And all of these big disruptions we've had, 2008, et cetera, these are part of the breaking down of the old ways. Capitalism's over, you heard it here first, it just actually you didn't hear it first, there's lots of people thinking right about this right now, but we've had to go through all of this disruption, and each disruption we frequently just chose to continue down the same path. Our hand is now being forced, but we're gonna have to start going down different paths. I think about it like the difference between change and transformation is you've got a puzzle on the table, right? Of the way things are, the way the world works. A big disruption comes that blows up the puzzle. Change is you put the puzzle back the way that it was. Transformation is you put a new puzzle down on the table using the same pieces. You rearrange them. And so what we have autonomy over at the individual level is putting those puzzle pieces back together when we're experiencing disruption. And for me, and what Emrit and I have been talking a lot about, is how that is part of what groundwork does. It starts to give you these tools and practices and capacity to be like, as I live through this historic disruption and my own personal experience of it, however that looks for you in your life, be it a mental health breakdown, surgery, a divorce, whichever, you have these big disruptions. You have that autonomy over how you put your puzzle back together. But your autonomy eventually hits a limit. And that's that limit we touched into briefly yesterday, which is the influence of the systems, the environments you're in. And so as these old systems die, this is the death rattle, right? This is so intense that's why everything is dialed urgent, is because we are living through crisis. And because these systems we're in are not adaptive. They're very rigid. There's only one right way to do things. There's only one right way of being. There's only one singular way of viewing and being in the world. That is breaking so fast. It's not working for any of us. And yet we have to exist inside of environments that insist on crisis. In our organizations, we've adopted this, and we built an entire culture on it. And culture is a set of practices. And so you personally might have these new practices and you're like, I'm not going to exist in crisis. I'm going to learn to rearrange my puzzle. And then you go into work and you're in an environment where all of your colleagues are acting in crisis, and you've tuned the organization to urgency mode, and it's built into the everyday practices. And that is the part where it's not your fault. It's just not. And also there's a paradoxical thing we can't avoid, which is it's not your fault, but we are the ones that have to create the different ways of being. And if I can give you anything, one of the things I hope you leave this room with is the moral authority that this is a huge moment. Laws, regulations, ways of doing, they gotta go. If they're anti-human, pro-crisis, pro-urgency, this is why we keep getting the same outcome. We keep rearranging the pieces in the same way. So whatever your version of radical is, radical just means get at the root. I invite you to step into it now. That's going to look different from all of you. I do not have a prescription, but if your organization is running an urgency culture, I really want to invite you to find all of your ways to disrupt that, especially if you're in leadership. Throw out the rule book, throw out the governance model, recreate it. And one of the ways you recreate it is in the practices. And so that's what we're starting to think about. We're saying, okay, wait a second. Amrita has learned how to equip individuals. She's learned how to equip teams. Now, how do we bring this cultural ethos, these practices, and scale it up to organizations to support the reality we're living in anyway? This is whether you choose as an organization proactively to say we're going to undergo transformative work. you can be proactive or it can happen to you. But I'm going to tell you, after years of study and observation, and I think you know in your gut, right? Like when you just feel into this world and watch this world, you're like, oh yeah, this shit is wild. It's as wild as you think, and it's wild because we all have different languages we like. Some things resonate, some things don't. But one way I think about it is we're birthing a new world. And that new world is going to be divergent, as if it's going to be many things at the same time. The era of one size fits all solutions is done. And so we have to create what works for us. And births are not gentle processes. Like, I personally don't have children, but I've been adjacent to a few births. That's so scary, man. Like, there's a reason why women's lives are on the line and children's, like, this is for lack of a nuanced word, it's kind of a violent process. And so that's the part of the process we're in now. We're in the birthing year. And our agency only takes us so far. And so how can we start thinking about transforming the systems that we're in? And so that's sort of the big question that I sit in and I'm learning how to work with. And Amrita and I would like to find a way to collaborate around is how can we work with you, support you, help you do this work in your organizations so that the birth can be safer, so that it can perhaps be gentler, so you can have an epidural instead of, the more natural experience that might be a bit tougher when maybe it doesn't need to be. No judgment. Sorry, I went down very judgment path there. Perfection.
Get the analogy though.
Yes, thank you. So that's the big thing that we're thinking about. And then the other big thing we're thinking about is how do we adapt groundwork for specifically a neurodivergent audience? And we saw that come up very live in the room yesterday, right? Is that there are these other ways of experiencing and being in the world. And groundwork is sort of agnostic in terms of as a set of practices and principles for the culture of your life or the culture of your organization. It's pretty much it's also scale and variant. You can use it in many, many contexts. And there's just some nuance that we can bring to that work and some ways in which we can support in different ways. And so we're starting to do that thinking. And then the third and final thing I'll say, and then I'm going to open it up, is the other big, can I throw out our other piece? The relational stuff or community care?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, no.
The other thing that we're doing is we're going to sit down and have a series of recorded conversations about our experiences of going through protracted crisis and what happened inside of our communities when it happened. Because she and I are, we kind of joke, we call ourselves social billionaires, where I've also expressed it as hyper connected and chronically alone. So I'm so blessed. I have so many amazing relationships in my life. I'm also someone who knows many different types of people. That ADHD comes out of me where I'm like, oh, I'm so excited about you. I'm so excited about you. And then I have like all these relationships and many of them go very deep. And so I have a very, very beautiful community. And also the pressures of this collapsing world are collapsing our communities too. Mm-hmm. And so I went through a 3-month suicidal depression after a very severe mental health crisis. And despite having all of that relational richness, I was almost entirely left alone. Mm-hmm. It was ChatGPT that got me through it, in all honesty. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about the complexities of that another day. And what my friends and I have been reflecting on in that, like, it took me actually, 3 months in to finally admit to friends, guys, this is what's really going on. Even though I didn't have my personal agency at the time to do that, I had to basically go through a quarter of my physiological recovery before I had enough resources in me to even be able to say that out loud. And what I learned from ChatGPT is like the danger of suicidal ideation is that you're practicing it. And the more you practice it, the realer that it gets. And so as that landed in me, I was like, oh my God, this is actually what needs to be unsafe. And so the combination of getting enough resourcing, having that realization, I told a group of 6 friends. And from that moment forward, I was much better cared for. I had moving in with some friends. It's been a whole thing. It's been for sure a transformational moment in my life. And also community breakdown, big, huge community breakdown. And the core of groundwork and the core of the story I'm telling you now is what I call relational practice. Human beings, our most fundamental nature, in my opinion, is relationality. And what these systems have taken away from us is the ability to be relational in our everyday lives. That's the cultural transformation that we need. And so her and I are going to do an entry point to that isn't from like Groundwork per se, the company, but it's just our offering to say, here's our experience, here's what we observed, here's what we learned, and here's some really practical ways that you can support your people in crisis as a way of returning to relational practice. And I think, many of us come from relational cultures, especially those of us with mixed backgrounds, like myself. You'll not know from my name, but I'm half Italian, and my mom's people are like very recently arrived, and so our relational practice is still strong. Like we still have these in different ways. I'm not saying. Sometimes I speak in declaratives that erase nuance. It's not on purpose. I just try to not talk too long, but not all of our relational practices are wrong. Many of us still have a strong tie to them. It's just that that tie to them is taxed. The busier that you are, the more you're pulled in many directions. All the things that we most crave and want as human beings are being taken away by these systems. I don't think there's anyone alive that you can walk up to on the street and be like, hey, would you like some more time to spend with your friends? Would you like to go to a barbecue this weekend? Like, these are the kinds of things that are being taken away from us, but these are the kinds of really fundamental, not Pollyanna things that make a community strong and bring us resilience and have enough slack in our systems so that when one of your people goes through crisis, you can be there for them. But how do you be there for yourself or others when you're at 120% of your capacity?
When you're in survival mode.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you. That's like a nice conclusion. So I'll pause there. And I just want to welcome open dialogue. And for now, I'll just leave it kind of organic. And if it needs more shaping, I'll step in. But I just welcome reflections and comments and questions.
I'm so curious about your educational background. Like, would you study sociology or
Human geography. Yeah. Yeah. And then I was lucky to work at a university for about 7 years. I worked in the social impact space and I was a part of a social innovation lab that did a lot of work. My kind of main portfolio was the future of work and learning. And then also my brain is just like, haven't turned it off for trying. Yeah.
so? I mean, this is all part of the very PhD content. So, sure.
The question over here.
Oh, I have comments.
Comments, yes.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think a lot about this work, and I'm someone who was working, doing community work, working in politics, and like burned out really bad. And like I shut up physically, and like I took time away. Big Bear has been a big part of this retreat center in particular, has been a big part of my journey to recovering myself. Honestly, it's been 5 years and it's still like, it takes time and there's new versions and new ways you see your survival patterns show up. But even in doing that for myself, I also hold space for folks as they're navigating. And one thing that I was reading a book recently about African spiritual traditions, and they were talking about how you don't leave a new mother alone, right? And how like pretty much the village expects to be there for at least the first year, and literally you just don't leave them alone because, and you're talking about ways of being, centuries ago probably, and now we have language like postpartum, and I think it's much more common for people to acknowledge that. But it was just that simple. No one was calling it that, but we all knew how to be for each other. And I agree with you that I think these systems, of course, are robbing that of us. And I think one of the, specifically in organizations where you're on the front lines, you are trying to navigate your own lived experience while helping folks navigate theirs. We're in places where it's limited resources. The system you're directly fighting against is the system that has its foot on our necks, and you're kind of holding your own experience in both. And so one of the main systems that I hear too from folks is like just material conditions, right? Like you're not resourced in a way to create space or to take time. And I think sometimes what I have found, and I maybe am offering this as a comment, question, but also something for like all of us to sit with, it creates a weird tension in you, the individual, when you're in the workplace, because you are starting to wake up. You are starting to like maybe think about the work differently, but your literal world, your literal assignment in your job is to be responsive.
Yes.
And so I think that tension is ever present. And sometimes too, we go through I know I went through that where it was like, I just had to I completely removed myself until I could find a new way to come at it. And even then I'm not doing the work in the way that I was before, but I know that that work was needed for the progress to be made, if that makes sense. So just holding, I guess I say all that to say is like, how do we hold those realities more specifically? And what are some tools like to just move through that tension? Because it's like we have obligations to our communities basically, when you're just frontlining it. And so it sounds like it feels good in practice, but in our bodies, it can get really challenging, which is why I think I took a long time to say all that. Sorry, y'all.
Great. That's super clear. That's why my
I have some thought over, or like, I have some thoughts in response, but also I want to think, like, cause that's others, I don't need to talk the whole time.
Yeah, I really feel what you were saying, Kristen. I think that a lot of what you were saying too, Jen, yeah, please. I feel like it does go back to if we were to really tap into African spirituality, indigenous practices. We've gotten so far away from what people were doing and how people valued people. And as a teacher, I have over 200 people and energies that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. A lot of them come from trauma. And so being able to establish relationships, that's like fundamental for me as a teacher. But I don't know that all teachers see it that way. And I feel like people with, fights and all kind of drama in school. And just to actually prioritize relationships, I feel like that would just shift the whole culture of the school so much. But I'm just trying to figure out how to create that space because I don't know even if I love the call to action basically that you were saying that we can challenge all these systems. And I know that I have a leadership position in my school. So I'm really grateful for this. Because I feel like it gives you the vocabulary to say, we need more relational opportunities. Being able to say that in a staff meeting and be like, this is so important. This is why it's so important. Yeah. Yeah. So I appreciate those.
I'm thinking that connects and bringing up everything that I can hear to ignite. When many of you know my story, about 5 years ago, I did a trap with a nonprofit that I started for a lot of reasons, and at Diverge, and my mind works a lot like Jen's, and I went off the grid doing what was safe for 5 years, and I've had 25 jobs in 5 years. So it's clearly a pattern that is not serving me. But I feel the scream of everything going on in culture and society. And before the death of anything, that's when the scream is the loudest. And it's the signal that it's dying. Actually, we read that great piece yesterday about the fires, you have to transform from a fire, you can't rebuild the same way. It's the whole instant thing. But the other thing about is that being an educator in leadership, the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I've always believed in the flip of that. It takes a child to raise a village. And the kids come to us with such creativity and purity and innocence and connection until they're disconnected because of projection and all the other tools that our society implements. And those things that's why I really feel the children in every generation brings about that in some context, but I feel so much of it is we are leaving, like every society before us wanted to leave their children, our children, a better place. I honestly feel like we're leaving our children like in utter chaos, in like, here, you clean up the mess. And that's the work on here is to like how do we amplify their voices, their creativity, their vision, and do that. So I don't know, I'm just really inspired by it. I'm going to a point to
Yeah, and maybe I'll just briefly hop in with a couple of the things.
Yeah.
Thank you for what all of you said. Number one, I never sometimes have all the answers. I certainly don't. Number two, we have to deal with the paradox, right? And even the really deeply unjust ones that make us want to scream and really lose our minds. And so we were describing a lot of the paradox of injustice. And those things are not going to be reconciled, and I'm not going to pretend to sit here and tell you that I can answer that because I do not. And then you reminded me, sorry, what's your name? Dawn, great to meet you. Dawn got me reminded of like what are the transformative experiences I've had with education, because for me, education has been a huge place of transformation. And the big thing was when I was at SFU, that's where I did my undergrad and worked. I stumbled in by accident to a program called the Semester in Dialogue. I have never learned so much in my life. That semester, they threw up the tech. This is a program that exists. We can talk about later if you want, but everything you thought you knew about the way education works gets thrown out, and you just sit in a circle. You sit in a circle for a whole semester, and you have community members come in and dialogue with you, and you speak across disciplines. It's an interdisciplinary cohort. So you're together 5 days a week. All this like desks and straight rows, lecture halls, and tech out. And so what I distill from that for our room today is back to the idea of practices. You don't even maybe need to like say the thing. You could just do the thing in these ways of like how you run a meeting, what your classroom looks like, these types of opportunities. And again, that's be different in every single context. Some of it's easier said than done. But what is more simple than sitting in circle and dialoguing? It is how we evolve. It is our first point of contact as human beings was sitting around the fire. I do also find it so interesting that a lot of tech leaders say AI is fire, which is a whole different day, but it's very transformative in an unexpected way to just be so simple. And I'm sure as an engineer, there's so many thoughts on that background on that, and it's probably not telling you anything you don't know already. And transformative practices sometimes are simpler than we think they are because we're swimming in so much complexity. 5 minutes, okay, yeah. And also, I'm data. I love data. So if ever you need data to back you up, you call me. I can let you know, like statistics on friendships and the state of relationships is absolutely shocking if you've ever seen it. So there's a lot of data to support the need to return to relationality.
So we'll have so many challenges within the systems that we're going to use already here. And then I'm curious how navigate leadership is very resistant to all kinds of change. There's a resistance to well-being, or there's a resistance to just open communication and going up against that, where the idea of for a consult, it would never seemingly consider. So just those challenges when you're trying to build something and internally against leadership who try to tell me so many.
Yeah, so a couple quick thoughts on that, and I'm always happy to follow ups outside of this, but something I've had to learn this is you got to meet people where they're at and talk to them in their language, so to speak. And one thing about corporate environments in particular is they're very responsive to risk and they're very responsive to costs. And so the risk profile of non-adapting is insane. And one of the core risks is on the HR side is that as awareness grows around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though it's being dismantled right now in lots of ways, in the visible ways, what that does is it leaves open legal risk. The number of legal actions being taken around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion is like 3x what it was 5 years ago. I talk about this as corporate narcissism, okay? So we have the urgency cultures, and then the CEO or whoever leadership is up, like, we're doing a wellness initiative, and then they like do the wellness initiative, and people get sicker. That gap between practice and outcomes is the gap where legal risk exists. And so and then also cost, right? Because turnover, quiet quitting, like the data statistics are overwhelming, and organizations will either be responsive at some point to the risk in the data, or they will collapse, because as you change your practices, there are kind of only a couple of options that happen. You persist until you get sick and you're forced out, which I've lived that story many times. You persist until your circumstances allow you to leave, or the organization collapses. So maybe there's other options on the board. I don't know. I'm not sure what they are, but
closing the gap, like you
Yeah.
said, speaking their language, speaking to what they can hear.
Yeah.
I mean, in the groundwork stuff, when I pitch it to corporations, I don't call it the survival pattern. I call it the stress response pattern. I don't call it the underlying pain. I call it the root cause. Do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I'm teaching productivity.
You're right.
Jen, we're at time.
yeah. Thank you so much. This is
Thank you.
fun is that we're just developing all the firms of this farm, and we really like to hear from you. Just feedback, thoughts, ideas, follow up, call, whatever. We really want to hear from you because we want to understand if this is a path we should pursue or not.
I think the one thing
Yes.
is the work analogy, it is painful to give national work, but that pain has a beautiful product.
Yes.
So it's not like about, pain, because, trying to, you find a different way to take that pain away, because that's just the part.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.